120 of the Thoughtium Navigating NOW virtual roundtable series. I am Anthony Ewing, your very gracious and excited host most weeks here Thursday afternoons at 3 o'clock. We have been thrilled to bring you leadership topics and leadership voices from across a multitude of different industries. Week over week, we love to show up with different leadership and different leadership discussions, and this week is no different. We'll introduce our guest here in just a moment, but I wanted to pause and welcome everybody for joining the show today. Those folks who are joining us live on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook as well. We want to thank those folks that are a part of our team and a part of our client network and a part of our community who tune in every week to get the latest on the leadership topics that matter most. We so enjoy the community and the camaraderie that we've been building with the Thoughtium Navigating NOW virtual roundtable series. Super excited about today's discussion and more so today's guest. We're going to be talking about leadership through a very, very interesting lens. One of which that I can't claim to be an expert on, but our guest today, Gordon Schmidt, who is an industrial and organizational psychologist. He's an author. He is a leader amongst the business management community. And his conversations are really at the intersection of business leadership and superheroes. I think we've all referred to our strengths at times as, our superpowers. But Gordon definitely goes to the next level and really makes some strong connections between the principles and the philosophies of some of the more current content that we engage with and watch, and how we should be showing up as leaders amongst our teams and amongst our organizations. So I want to welcome Gordon to the table. Gordon, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Excited to be here. Excited to chat about this topic. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
in my experience.
It's so great. Yeah, heading into this show, you and I were talking, I was saying, I feel more excited about episodes that maybe I don't have a deep and rich background on, because as you said, that's where you start to learn something. And as much as I'm so everyday immersed in leadership and leadership development, I know nothing about the Marvel universe, or I should say the multiverse. And I think it's fascinating that although it's probably not everything that you do, you've found a little bit of this niche in bringing this kind of mainstream, pop culture concept that most folks are aware of, and you've applied it to leadership principles. And that's really what we're going to be diving into today. But first, tell us a little bit about, you and what you're up to today, because I know that you're an author, you're a professor. Tell us a little bit about you and your practitionership or the work that you love to do.
Yeah, so I'm a professor of management at the University of Louisiana Monroe. I'm also the director of the School of Management. So I kind of help. I'm in a leadership role of sort of 6 programs. I do sort of the development and assessment for a number of faculty as well as teaching classes in leadership, human resource development. I'm doing a course right now in digital HR, which is a lot of fun, coming up with as I go. And so that's so I teach classes. I do research related to this stuff related to using sort of superheroes to teach leadership, broader about pop culture. How do we learn from pop culture? How can we use it to make our ideas understandable and engaging? And I do research related to the future of work and consulting about that too. Digital technologies, changing the world and and what we do and how we can do it well is something I do consult with. I do talk to people on. I do engage with. And just outreach of these ideas, all these different ideas we have in psychology and management and related fields that, can help the world, but they're in dusty journals that people can't read. And if you can find them, you can't understand them. And so that's something I think is really important, is making this stuff understandable, because people should be using it. We should be understanding it because it's helpful.
Yeah. Tell me about the first time that you knew that you wanted to become a professor. Like, what was the indicator for you that it's time to go into academia?
Well, I think starting just as going to school and kind of liking liking the university, liking this idea of learning new stuff, and sort of just developing into that. I think with a lot of people, the research is interesting, and then the idea of sort of it's a good place to make impact, to my mind.
Mm.
Getting out there and talking to people and sort of keeping up to date with the world and what people are doing. I learn so much from my students, learn about things I never heard of or wouldn't hear of. And so that kind of put me on that path of like, oh, this seems like it'd be a fun place to think about stuff and also have opportunities to still get engaged in the world and in that type of thing. So that's kind of where I came from.
Yeah, I want to dig in a little bit deeper. I'm very curious, as a professor, as somebody who appreciates academia and has been in that realm and in that environment, and as somebody who has navigated and knows kind of the working culture of corporate America. If you had to take one or two things from the way that we learn as adults and apply them and inject more of that into the way that we exist in corporate America, what would one or two of those things be? Like, what would you take from the classroom and put into the conference room?
I think that's a great question. One thing I think is, error-based learning and learning through our mistakes. I think is something that in the classroom it's easy to do and feel like it's normal. Well, I think a lot of times in practice, we act like everyone knows what they're doing and doesn't make mistakes. We read biographies of famous CEOs and we assume they were great at everything forever. And to me, that there's a lot of hype that the classroom, you don't need the hype as much. You're learning. It's okay if you get something wrong. You learn from it. Because if you don't do anything wrong, you never really learn anything either.
Yeah.
And that ability to kind of learn something and then keep going, even if you've fallen on your face, I think is something that is useful in corporate America, as well as that humility with people. If somebody screws up, it doesn't mean fire them immediately. It means, okay, how do we learn from this and what do we do next? I think sometimes, especially when we get aggressive in corporate culture and corporate ideas, win or you get fired, that's not a good way to really run life. And the classroom can really facilitate that. And I think good business over time does that as well. So that's certainly an idea.
Really good
I
points.
would say on that. Yeah. And
really
learning,
good points.
I think, is part of the classroom. Part two is,
sure.
A lot of times we have people get out of school and then they're like, well, I haven't read anything in 20 years. Right. And that's a real issue. Being able to keep up and trying to keep that continuous learning is really important. We got lots of buzzwords in industry like continuous improvement and these systems, but really making that how people behave and do versus just it's, a way to notate stuff. It's a computer. A computer lets us continuously improve. Well, no, people's perspectives really has that impact on it. People thinking about that, using it, and we can create so much data that never gets looked at or doesn't get actually implemented in life, right? And I think that perspective of, I don't know everything and there's always more to learn, to me is very helpful in corporations and making that space for people to do that is important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with those points. I want to go back to your first one and reiterate there is, because this is a bridge that I'm almost obsessed with, which is how we learn outside of the corporate classroom is sometimes so different than the way that we learn in corporate training. And in academia, there's almost this veil of perfection that you don't need because you're in a true kind of learning environment. And some of the best, undergrad and graduate classrooms that I've ever been in did not require the perfect answer. It was a true kind of open and iterative dialogue, between classmates and the classmates between the professor. And although I think we've made some strides in corporate America, particularly in corporate learning and development, there still is a little bit of this expectation that of true performance, and that begins on day one. If you're in a training environment, you've got to have the right answer. If you're in a training environment, it's how quickly can we get ramped and how quickly can we say the right things? How quickly can we adapt the corporate lexicon? And I think back to my days in undergrad and graduate, and I think of just how open and available I was to failing and authentic, leadership in the classroom. And I want to bring more of that to the corporate space, but that's a whole separate conversation. I want to get a little bit closer to the topic at hand today. And today we're really talking about, learning leadership principles through Marvel. So 2 questions. How did you become interested in Marvel? Was it something that you grew up with, or was it something that maybe just recently, you developed a passion for? And what is the multiverse?
Okay. Well, I got into comic books as a kid. And so reading these superheroes and all of that, growing up with it, it was always something of interest. It was always something I wanted to follow. And then we started actually getting good movies on these topics.
Right.
It took a while. For a while, there was no good superhero movies. And now we've got a million of them. We've got a whole Marvel Cinematic Universe that's beyond anything I thought would ever be. Like, just an okay movie seemed like a pretty large goal based on some of the bad superhero movies from the 80s and 90s. But so, this was always, Marvel was always something of interest for me since a kid. I think with going to school and thinking about leadership and industrial organizational psychology, it always made me, when I watch stuff, to think about, how's the leadership in this? How are people being motivated? All these things that I was learning, to me, ended up directly connecting pretty well with what's, with these types of things, and saying, hey, I talk about them in class as examples, think about them as, in that type of way too. And so that's sort of where the interest came from, and the book was sort of a natural aspect out of that. As well as just, we did a decent amount of research on outreach. How do we tell people about these concepts that matter? How do we tell people to understand? And it was like, well, the stuff that people like, the stuff that's interesting, is a good way to help people, to understand. So
great. And the multiverse, to give us a 15-second summary on that, if it's even possible.
Yeah. So the multiverse is actually an interesting idea to me, because it's about what happens when we make different choices. How would that affect the rest of the world? And so the Marvel universe has used stuff like the multiverse of, if Iron Man did this or that, how would things be different? And I think it's actually a good way to think about the world, because we tend to act like whoever succeeded, they were always going to succeed. It was always 100%. Everything was fixed. But a lot of times, it's a coin flip, or it's luck, right? You got 10 founders, and 9 of them are going to go bankrupt, and 1 is going to be, Facebook or whatever, right? And it's not always easy at the start to say, oh, it was, this company was always going to make it. It was this luck, or this situation, or this aspect that was valuable then. Talk about that with Facebook, even, is Facebook at the time, people were complaining about MySpace and Friendster. They weren't stable. There was questions about malware, security. Facebook said, you got to be at Harvard. The site never breaks down. Does anybody want that now? No. Did people want that at the time? Yes. It was exactly what the market needed, and that's why they did it. Not that they were better than MySpace at the time or any of those things, but they fit the need better. And that's something I think ideas like the multiverse are helpful on, is there's a bunch of possibilities where the people that are successful now, are not in those, where other things work, or other things are the dominant narrative or the dominant whatever. Because once it happens, it feels like it was always going to happen. But that's not the case in a lot of cases.
That's really cool. I mean, that's just one concept that's coming from MCU, or the Marvel comic universe, that can be immediately applied to leadership principles. I mean, it's classic kind of scenario planning, or maybe not jumping to, not jumping to conclusions, or seeing outcomes as inevitable, but more so, one of many. the book that you're speaking to is Leaders Assemble: Leadership in the MCU. And this was really an artifact of the work and the research that you've done on really the intersection of this kind of Marvel universe and leadership principles. Give us, we'll get real kind of tangible here and tactical, and then maybe we can zoom out, but give us maybe one or two leadership principles that can so easily be found in a specific Marvel comic or Marvel comic movie. Or maybe what's one of your favorite?
Yeah, so one of my favorites, I think, is kind of less intuitive, which is part of why I like it, which is a movie like Guardians of the Galaxy and leadership. And so you've got kind of a leader in that movie, Star-Lord, but you've got a lot of very unruly characters that do their own thing, and they're not the people that want to be herded. And it's a good illustration, I think, of how leadership varies based on context of what's effective. So with the various Guardians and their different perspectives, their different goals, if you come in and say, hey, Rocket Raccoon, do this. Hey, Groot, do that. They're going to say, screw you, I'm doing my own thing. And so in that environment, a leader just telling people what to do isn't going to work. And what we talk about in the book with that is shared leadership, this idea that people step up as leaders based on their competence, based on their time, and it's sort of fluid who's in charge. And so the Guardians work together really well because when the situation comes up, we need an expert. So we need a jailbreak, and Rocket Raccoon is broken out of jail multiple times. He's in charge at the moment because we see he has that. When somebody needs knowledge on Thanos, well, one of the people on knowledge on Thanos, like Gamora, takes over the lead. And I think it's something that in a lot of situations, we act like the leader is the best at everything. The one designated manager is the expert. But that's usually not true, right? There's somebody that knows this topic more. There's somebody that has better perspective. And when that's the case, that person might make a lot of sense to be in charge or have greater influence on our result. And so again, I don't think people see that movie as, oh, Star-Lord's a great leader, but to be able to go along with a group, to have that shared leadership across people is actually, it's rare that you do it well, and it's very helpful in a lot of circumstances when we have great people, when we've got experts.
Yeah, I love that. We love to, when we work with our clients, particularly leaders of functions or organizations, we really ask them to not just focus on what we call vertical or silo alignment, but more of that horizontal team. How do you build that horizontal? And in most cases, that would be a department lead or a function lead and their leadership team. And I think so many times we work with leaders who see their leadership team as a collection of functions that all have their kind of vertical remit. And every once in a while we come together. But the best leaders are the ones that can really strengthen that horizontal kind of team leadership. And you have to be, there's obviously trust that has to be involved in there. And also like really being able to identify and lighten up the individual talents of your team in a way that supports the collective. So horizontal leadership and Guardians of the Galaxy, who knew? Maybe give us one more, and if that's your favorite one, are there certain principles that you see leaders breaking all the time or more often that can be reflected in the Marvel comic universe?
Yeah, well, and I think one thing that's important to realize to some degree too is that, everyone's sort of the superhero in their life. Everyone has skills and things they're doing. And a lot of times we act like, they're just a tool for the organization, or this is the only thing they do, or when in fact we're bringing together different perspectives and different skills. And that's what I really like about, superhero teams and groups like the Avengers is you get together all these very talented people. They all save the world on their own multiple times, but they need to come together for a greater threat, a bigger problem, and figure out how the heck do we work together when we already have strong opinions and we already mostly have a pretty high opinion of ourselves, right? It's not that I think I'm bad and you should lead me. It's like, I'm the best. You shouldn't tell me what to do. And that to
Yeah.
me is a lot more likely of what we see in real organizations, because it's not the
Yeah.
CEO speaks and everybody listens. It's a boss tells you to do something and maybe you do it. Do you put in all your work? Do you give the input that's really necessary? Do you just say, I'm just going to let it ride? That happens a lot
Yeah.
more in real life than we would see
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of advice books on management, where we've got to get people connected. We've got to use their strengths and all that. So,
This is a little bit of a tangent question, but Gordon, why do all action movies now have to have like 7 different uh, heroes in them? Like, is this just like the like where we are, like in terms of our like attention span? Like, we need 19 things happening at the same time, or are we missing like the days where there really was like a single hero and there was like deep character development and you could focus on one storyline at a time?
well, I think it is partly this idea of raising the stakes, right? So Iron Man 3 better be 3
Ooh,
times more exciting than Iron
yeah,
Man 1. Iron Man
yeah,
1's still a better movie. But, I think there's some of that of where do we go next? And there is sort of audience expectation it's going to be bigger. And that's actually something we've seen with at the
so
end of
interesting.
phase 3 of Marvel movies. We had a big, huge event. All this people came together, around defeating Thanos and all this.
Hmm.
And then people have been complaining about phase 4, the most recent phase that just completed. Why? Because it was smaller stories focused more on one person. So we
Mm,
introduced new characters like She-Hulk or Miss Marvel more in more personal stories. What do people say? This isn't the big narrative. It's not important
yeah,
enough. And so I
yeah,
think we get that in both directions. We get pushed to it's got to be bigger and better, but also people want something that seems like it's important. So if Miss Marvel
yeah,
isn't fighting Thanos, why the heck is she even here?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think that gets that, and I think we get that in organizations too, right? We did something big. Now we need to, go even
Yes,
further. It needs to be a bigger,
yeah,
bigger deal,
yeah,
and that sometimes leads to the biggest disasters around
yeah,
as we go into things we really shouldn't, or
yeah,
make big purchases at companies we shouldn't do, that type
yeah.
of thing. Right? That's how
Oh,
it goes.
I love the application. I'm starting to learn, Gordon, that like no matter what I throw at you around Marvel, like you're going to be able to apply it to leadership in corporate America, which I'm starting to now see just how deep and how easy the connections can be made. In
Oh, yeah.
terms of that, like that need to go to the next level, I know that exists within large organizations as they kind of move through their kind of company lifestyle, whether that's adding new product lines or new revenue streams.
Mhm.
Where I've seen that the most, and maybe at the quietest, is in startups and small organizations that are having to decide whether they are going to stay a small organization or whether they are going to scale to something bigger. And I think
Mhm.
there's such an expectation, and I know this as a startup founder myself, and being so entrenched in the small business community,
Mhm.
there's such an expectation that success means taking your organization to the next level, raising that next round of capital, growing that next layer
Mhm.
of your team, showing the world that you are expanding and you're expanding up into the right in the right direction. Um, and I think there are real moments as small business owners that you do have to decide what's right for the organization, the health of the organization. We've had those moments over the course of 6 years.
Mhm.
If you asked me 6 years ago, at this point, we would have been on the equivalent of like Iron Man 6, and there'd be like 17 superheroes involved, and we'd have 6 different business units and 27 different countries. Um, but here we are, this small organization, this 15-person firm that has this incredible client group with us and this community around us. We're continuing to pour into, and we're realizing that it only takes a few superheroes, and
Mhm.
that storyline can change drastically year over year over year. That like Iron Man can be at the center of this, and like his world can adapt year over year over year. So I love the application to small business ownership, and I'm curious if you have anything to add or note on that.
Yeah, well, and I think that's sort of the difficulty too, is there's sort of the path and there's what gets covered. So, we celebrate when the
Yeah.
company is at a billion-dollar valuation, whether that valuation is, too low, too high, or 99% too high. That's
Right.
just, that's kind of what gets covered when there's a lot of great companies, got a lot of great organizations doing crucial work that they're not huge, they're not flashy. And I think that that's something you can spend a lot of money to get really flashy, but that doesn't mean you've helped your business, to my mind, at all. You might have harmed it
Mhm.
more than
Yeah.
anything else.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's important to consider. What's the goal? What are we really trying to do? The goal
Yeah.
shouldn't be we're just going to make $1 billion. The goal should be, the positive we're giving to the community or the world, or
Yeah.
the customers.
The impact.
Superheroes.
Mhm.
The idea of saving the world is a very clear. Oh yeah, nobody wants the world not to be saved, to some degree at least. But
Yeah.
that idea of that mission, I think, is really important not to lose sight of.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Um, I shouldn't say every, but most of these Marvel movies have a villain.
Mm,
And I'm curious, like, how are you bringing that into leadership principles? Are there things we can learn from villains? We sometimes empathize with villains, right? As viewers. And so what
totally.
from kind of the villain side can you bring to this conversation, or do you bring to these conversations?
Well, and I think one thing that we do with the book too is, we look at positive and negative sides. We don't say Captain America is only perfect. We talk about when people make mistakes in the movies as well and learn from them. And I think villains, we can both learn from their mistakes, but also kind of learn how we can get tricked by people as well. A good
Hmm.
example of this is in the first Black Panther movie, with this character Killmonger, played by a great actor, very charismatic. Convinces some people on his side of this idea that this nation of Wakanda needs to be going out there more active in the world, supporting more people in the world and really active. And
Hmm.
a lot of people ask, is Killmonger right? Is he saying the right things? And where we come down on it is there's definitely merit to some of these ideas, but Killmonger's goal is revenge. He doesn't care about Wakanda's well-being. He doesn't really care about the well-being of others. He just wants to get revenge on sort of how he feels he was wrong. And what that means
Mm.
is, even if there's good things about how he's doing things, even if he's very charismatic, it's not going to result in things that are good for Wakanda. And that's also very true in organizations. Very charismatic leaders might motivate you, but if they don't have good intentions in mind, or they don't really think through what the organization should be about, really, they're going to lead you down bad paths. And so I think, looking at some of that, a lot of villains are very charismatic. They can convince people of stuff, but they don't build their followers up. They don't do things like shared leadership, and they don't have goals that ultimately benefit their
Mm.
company or the world. They cause problems instead. And so that's something we need to watch for. Yeah, just because you're a good speaker doesn't mean you're a good person or you're good for the company. That's just how it goes.
Mm. What are the and this will be the last question, then we'll dive into kind of the lightning round. But I'm curious, Gordon, as you start to develop, these connections and these ties with leadership principles, how are some of the ways that you're working with, students, and or clients to help apply some of these principles?
Yeah, and so we've done that a few different ways. One way, in the classroom itself, is doing things like showing movie clips as we talk about topics. What we've done some blog posts looking at some pop culture stuff as it happens, not just Marvel, but shows like The Sandman. We did one on What We Do in the Shadows, which is a show I love,
Mm.
talking about things there too. But trying to take these things to help students to learn the topics as well as the public. I know in consulting, what we've done is we've talked about people watching the movies or watching the clips and then talking about what was good and what was bad, because it's a low stakes situation. You can criticize Captain America, well, it's a lot harder to say I screwed up as a leader or my CEO screwed up, right?
Mm.
And so in consulting, I think it's a great way to low stakes, interesting ideas and
Ooh, I
things
love
people
that.
already often know about, right? These
Yeah.
are interesting things that they know about, and they're like, oh yeah, and making them see I could be like Captain America. Maybe I don't have a shield I'm throwing at people. Maybe I'm not wearing a costume, although maybe you are. Maybe that's what your company's about. But I can take some of those characteristics and be a servant leader like him for this company that I work at. There's still relevant aspects. When they may not have thought it
Mhm.
that way, they might have thought, well, Captain America's perfect. He's a superhero. I'm a real person. But
Yeah.
being able to see I can be empowered by these ideas, I can be like Captain America in this way. I think
Yeah.
it can be really powerful from a consulting perspective.
Yeah, I love the concept of just kind of like bringing these in as almost like this third party, like case study, as
Yeah.
opposed to we're looking at specific leaders within our organization or our team. I think they're also like wonderful conversation starters. And I also love the idea of like showing particular clips. I don't think I've ever watched, an action movie or a Marvel movie truly through the lens of like leadership and leadership principles. I bet if you did and you consciously watched these movies, you would see it just all over the place.
Oh yeah, yeah, and that's what the book. There's a lot more we could have written than was in the book on it. It's
Yeah,
all over the place. Interesting stuff.
that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you for bringing us a little bit closer to this topic. I think, one of the things that just thrills me about this discussion is that there are so many different niches out there for us
Oh,
to sharpen our craft, for us to apply to topics that we're very passionate about. And I think some of the most effective ones are when you can bring one world into another world. And in this case, the Marvel universe, which everybody's so familiar with, and even the classic kind of superhero storyline, into the way that we engage and interact as leaders every day. It's so true. And these movies are a source of real escapism for most people. So most people are not watching them through the lens of how they might show up in a boardroom or a conference room. But
mm.
when you do, there's so much to learn. And Gordon, I just appreciate your passion for this very small niche. I think that's one of the
Yeah,
most amazing things about the general marketplace today, more than ever in our history. You can have a real narrow passion, a real specific passion, and we have the tools and the technology and the audience and the reach to be able to disseminate that. And there's so many people out there that will really nerd out about this stuff, much like we have today. So thank you so much. Do you have time for a quick lightning round?
sure. Sounds fun. I'm ready.
Okay. Now I'm thinking this lightning round has to be, all of these questions have to be through the lens of superheroes. And I'm going to have to like really go on the fly on this one. Favorite, and this doesn't have to be just in the Marvel universe, favorite superhero movie of all time.
Probably overall Black Panther. Just there's so many
Ooh.
interesting elements and just a complicated story with sort of a lot of twists and turns and interesting concepts in it. Very well acted as well. So yeah,
Mm.
absolutely.
Now I'm assuming that's with the assumption that like the no-brainer greatest of all time is Dark Knight Rises. Like I'm assuming you're just saying like that has ultimately won
It's a good movie.
the greatest action movie. I mean, Heath Ledger, like that
Yeah.
that movie was incredible.
That's a
That's a
great
movie
movie.
that
No, I agree.
and it has two characters, deep character development, and
Oh yeah.
it doesn't need 17 different storylines. Such a
Yeah,
good
yeah,
movie and a
absolutely.
good movie to go back to. Uh,
Oh yeah. Yeah, watch multiple
if
times. Good movie.
if you had to choose a Marvel superhero to install in every organization, who would it be? Like you had one superhero that you had to install in every single organization across the country. Who would be the most impactful or the most fit?
Across all organizations.
Like every organization has a
Yeah.
CEO, they also have a this.
I would probably say for this, Captain America would be very useful to have for that idea of
Mm.
service, of selflessness, thinking like a servant leader across situations. I think would be helpful in almost everywhere in some way. I think if you
Yeah.
put Iron Man everywhere, somebody would probably kill him in at least a few organizations because
Because of the ego. Yeah.
yeah, he's got the ego. There's enough people with ego in enough organizations. I'll throw that out there. Not that he wouldn't be helpful, but Captain America, I think, would be a helpful add-on compared to what we sometimes see.
I love that. And what would be the most underrated Marvel comic persona in terms of their leadership abilities? Underrated.
So one thing, and we do actually talk about in the book a little bit, is talk about the character of Black Widow. And so we have this period in the movies where for 5 years, half the population of the Earth has disappeared, and a bunch of the old, traditional male Marvel leaders have kind of either retired or flaked out. And so Black Widow basically, suddenly she's in charge of everything. And what we see is when we look 5 years later, and there's sort of the gap, they skip most of it, is that she's basically running the whole world. She's got a group together. You've got different people across that. You've got a much more multi-ethnic. You've got female leaders. And people are sad. You know, you'd be sad too. We'd all be sad. But the world is functioning despite having the worst crisis of all time. Black Widow has been the central leader for that. Unfortunately, we don't see a lot in the movies or the TV series is what happens or what she does. But I'd be really fascinated to see that. And unfortunately, once there's a way to fix it, all the white dude leaders come back and Black Widow goes back to being just a member of the team. And I think it's a tragedy because she definitely had some great leadership skills to get the world to a place where it was okay 5 years later. This is an apocalypse. Apocalyptic event happened. She was a big part of making sure the world still functions. Yeah. To me, that's something I'd love to see in a movie or a TV series or anything, really. I want to read it.
That's wonderful. Last one, Gordon, which superhero do you relate to most in terms of your leadership style?
Leadership style. To me at least, I do think, the Black Panther T'Challa, with this idea of trying to figure out people's interests, try to work with them versus thinking of people as enemies, I think is really helpful. It's something that I aspire to do and be, I think, overall, because I think it's the right way. When we see people as enemies, they're enemies. When we don't try to reach out to people, we're not going to be friends. And so I think it's an important way to try to lead and to do that. Give people benefit of the doubt, try to help them to meet what they need. And when you do that, a lot of times the worst is people are neutral versus, you got a feud going. And so I think it's good to aspire to. It does take not taking things personally as much. It does take patience. But it is certainly something that I try to do as best as I can.
Wonderful. Gordon, it was such a pleasure to have you at the table today. I learned a lot about leadership, also a lot about the Marvel universe. So I might be able to hang in a conversation with a few of my friends that are a little bit more obsessed than I am with these movies. How can folks find you and your book?
Sure. So the book itself, you can just find it on Amazon. Leaders Assemble: Leadership in the MCU. Easy enough to find. I am on LinkedIn and Twitter. If you just go to LinkedIn and look up Gordon Schmidt, you'll find me. I will say there's another Gordon Schmidt there, and recently somebody tagged him on something for me, and then he messaged me and tagged me to say, hey, they tagged the wrong Gordon Schmidt. So if you contact him, he will probably send you over to me. If he wasn't the right nice of him. So it's very easy on LinkedIn to find me through me or the other Gordon Schmidt, apparently. But yeah, Twitter as well. My Twitter ID is @IOPsychology. And so I post both of theirs pretty well. And if you Google Gordon Schmidt, you'll generally find me pretty easily. Gordon Schmidt and Professor or whatever. I'm there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gordon. We so appreciate your perspective, and we look forward to having you back. I feel like this is just the start of the discussion.
Oh yeah, happy to be here. So let me know.
All right. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon. All right. We will close out this episode. I'll tell you, episode 120 was just a delight. It is so exciting to see so many different practitioners out there that have such significant and specific passions, and how they apply that to leadership is a reminder to us all that leadership is so multidimensional. There's not a single book written that has the formula, and there's something for everybody in the world of leadership and leadership development, and that's what makes our work here at Thoughtium just so incredibly fruitful and so expanding at all times. So we want to thank Gordon for joining. We also want to thank everybody who's joined this live cast today, those folks who are tuning in across all social media platforms. We want to particularly thank our LinkedIn community for stopping by and tuning in. So much of you all have reached out to myself or our colleagues and said that every Thursday afternoon at some point they'll tune in. And our vision with Thoughtium's platforms here are that every Thursday you can count on tuning in. Regardless of whether you know the topic or the conversation, there's something for everybody, and I hope there was today. So with that, we will look forward to episode 121 next Thursday, 3 p.m. Central. You can catch all of our previous episodes and learn about our future ones at thougtium.com/live. Thank you all so much for joining. Have a wonderful rest of the week, and we will see you next Thursday.